All right, strap in. We're going back into Tom Cheetham, The World Turned Inside Out, Henry Corbin, and The Angel Out Ahead. I'm in chapter 5, The Angel and Individuation, and I'm continuing on from where I got up to, which was the relevance of the sort of ontology of individuation of Mulla Sadra, who described how one's relationship with the divine double, or the sort of angel or sacred second self or Jungian anima, all roughly equivalent figures, that this relationship unlocks certain affordances that have to do with personification. In Jung, it's the process of individuation, but toward deeper presence, a deeper sort of internal unity or integrity, in a way, deeper self-expression, but I don't want to get that romantic angle. So I'm going to offer the quote from Mulla Sadra, and that will take us right back to the depth of this craziness. Sorry, it was Corbin who said, before him, Mulla Sadra, the essences or quiddities were thought of as priorities and immutable. Whether existence were superadded to them or not, nothing changed in the constitution of these essences. Mulla Sadra, on the contrary, gave priority to existence. It was the act and mode of existing that determined what an essence was. The act of existing was indeed capable of many degrees of intensification or degradation. For example, to the metaphysics of essences, the status of man or the status of the body is a constant. But to Mulla Sadra's existential metaphysic, being a man is possible in many degrees, from being a demon with a human face to the sublime condition of being the perfect man. What is called the body passes through a multitude of states, from being a perishable body in this world to being a subtle or even a divine body. These changes always depend upon intensifications or attenuations, that is, degradations, in the act of existing. The thought that intensifications of being give life to our idea of the forms of being, of essences, is one of the main characteristics of his metaphysics. In itself, it initiates a phenomenology of the act of existing. Okay, so yeah, again, like I said, this is a lot, right? And so this is basically the connection to Heidegger from Corbin's imaginal world. And Cheetham says, it does not require a large leap to connect this phenomenology of modes of presence with Heidegger's conception of human being as design. Okay, so the idea basically being that the different, I don't know, aspects of the relationship with the divine double, they change our mode of existing. They change our mode of being in the world. And so the idea is that one can actually exist to greater or lesser degree, and that one's relationship with the divine double has a key say in that, and that this actually determines one's essence. And so the connection with Heidegger, obviously, being that the different modes of presence that we bring to bear disclose different, let's say, aspects of design being there. But we'll continue here. So we're simply talking about the way that one's relationship with the divine double sort of shows up at a existential level. Cheetham says, the phenomenology of the intensities of existence corresponds exactly to the qualitative space of the imaginal world, because it is only there that these qualitative differences, these intensifications and degradations of being, can occur. They are not visible as such in the world of matter. Even the creations of the powerful hima, which is connected to thought of the heart, of Gnostic masters, are visible only to other Gnostics. Moral and spiritual advances or failures create the worlds in which the soul moves. By virtue of the intensity of existence, the act of presence, and the degree of individuation of that soul. This intensification of being is accomplished in the imaginal world through the struggle of the human being with and for the angel of its being. Gosh. Okay, so I'm just understand that by taking up the perspective of the soul, one inhabits the imaginal world, and within that place, that sort of the earthly conception of the soul, if you like, is then in relationship with the divine double, which form different aspects of one being. But that relationship is multifaceted and complex. That where properly conducted, it can give rise to an intensification of being. So there's a way that one can come to be more who one is. One can come to exist in a way with more intensity. And so to me, this is connected with the act of presence, which Corbin and Cheetham have been talking about a lot. This was a kind of the soul's becoming aware of itself, which was a certain epiphany or act of self-reflective awareness that is designed to reunify splits between subject, object, knower, and known, abstract and sensory. I think we can see here that we can understand some of the work that goes into that act of presence, namely that act of presence is the act of presence of a being, which is a kind of, in a way, amalgamation or synthesis of the higher and lower aspects of the soul, or the earthly soul and the heavenly soul, the heavenly part of which is the divine double. I think that would be fair to say. And so the idea would be that from out of that right relationship sort of properly conducted, one can, like certain epiphanies, it's like the awareness of that. So look, that's really tricky. I have to get a couple of things. One of them is that this, in a way, earthly and heavenly soul, or you could say anima and divine double. I think that would be fair to say. When they come into relationship, they can come to unity. And that coming into unity is the coming into awareness of a being. And I don't know how to describe that being other than as there's a kind of coming together of different aspects of the soul. So a kind of restoration or remembering of the soul that I would connect with amanesis. And the idea is that that is a relationship that can be worked on in practice, that can give rise to the sort of the awareness of, again, the amanesis or remembering of that soul. And what's the point of that? That there are intensifications and degradations of being that go along with this. Say is that the coming into being of that relationship between the different aspects of the soul is in some way equivalent to spiritual development. which involves, but it's not limited to, moral development. And I would say that has a flavor of individuation. So I think the idea is that that process of development can give rise to different intensities of existence. So it's a development of existential awareness, or simply awareness, just as much as it is other kinds of development. And this gives rise to the idea of, in a sense, levels of being or levels of the soul, because it's not, like when we think about awareness, right, we think of a sort of internal state, but it's not that. It is that, but it's more than that. It's also that this relationship, this struggle of the human person with and for the angel of its being, I would say the developing relationship with different aspects of the soul, it can give rise to not only epiphany, but to a kind of normative progression through different levels that I would connect to. I mean, the obvious analogy is levels of the video game. So when you complete one level, you get to move to the next level. And this is connected with different worlds, literally inhabiting sort of different spaces within the imaginal worlds. So that the world in which the soul moves is created differently as a result of that developmental process, which encompasses different intensities of existence, different qualities of existing. I think I would name one of the difficulties that I'm having is that there is, on the one hand, different ways to exist, all of which could be considered to be equally existing, but in different ways. And then there's a separate idea that one can actually exist more or less. And I think both seem to apply. I think I would connect, the idea would be that um, if you ever play a video game, like the final levels, they're kind of more intense. And so if we could, I don't know, like I don't know how else to understand this, because it's like the idea being that there are some qualities of being that have a sort of greater intensity of existence, which I think we can connect here with greater personification and greater individuality, also further development in terms of individuation. And so I'm going to repeat that paragraph and then go on to the quote from Corbin, and then we'll move on. Quote, "The phenomenology of the intensities of existence corresponds exactly to the qualitative space of the imaginal world, because it is only there that these qualitative differences, these intensifications and degradations of being, can occur. They are not visible as such in the world of matter. Even the creations of the powerful himmer of the Gnostic masters are visible only to other Gnostics. Moral and spiritual advances or failures create the worlds in which the soul moves, by virtue of the intensity of existence, the act of presence, and the degree of individuation of that soul. This intensification of being is accomplished in the imaginal world, through the struggle of the human person with and for the angel of its being." Quote from Corbin, "The intensification of the acts of existing, the intensification of the acts of existing, as professed by the metaphysics of Sadra Shirazi, raises the status of the body to the state of spiritual body, in truth, the divine body. The organ of this transmutation, this generation of the spiritual body, is in Jacob Boehme, as in Mulla Sadra, the power of the imagination, which is the magical faculty par excellence, imago magia, because it is the soul itself, animated by its perfect nature, its celestial role. Okay, so here we have the idea that this different qualities of existence that could go along with these different, let's say, levels of the soul is obviously connected to the process of individuation, or we could just say spiritual development at this point. But we also have the idea that this is connected with the sort of states of the body, the different bodies that are relevant, the different of our bodies that are relevant. And this is connected with the power of the imagination, because that in a way, that faculty is what animates the soul. So there's obviously a deep interrelationship between the soul and the imagination that is connected to development. Okay, let's continue. Cheetham says, but if we are not in possession of and able to live within the corresponding cosmology, there's no way this contact with the angel can occur. Kind of feel that contact might occur first and cosmology afterwards, but Cheetham might disagree. Let's try and find out. However much we might struggle, there will be no direction in which to turn. We may well know we are lost, but there is quite literally no way home in a world without the place where this encounter can occur. There is quite literally no way home in a world without the place where this encounter can occur. Okay, so this brings up the notion of we need a spiritual home, not just a real home, but we're spiritually lost. And so there's a kind of, obviously by place, we don't just mean physical place, we also mean spiritual place. And I think this is the whole point of the philosophical Silk Road in a way. Okay, and so last time we encountered the idea of the pravati, which I understand to be um, essentially the divine double of an individual or a group. We had the quote from earlier, quote, every physical or moral entity, every complete being or group of beings belonging to the world of light has its pravati. What they announce to earthly beings is therefore an essentially dual structure that gives to each one a heavenly archetype or angel, whose earthly counterpart he is. Okay, that's a Mazdaean concept, and now this comes forward. So we were talking about the idea of a spiritual home, and the relevance of the idea of pravati is in this quote, again from Corbin, who says, it is this pravati, or I understand divine double, that gives its true dimension to the person. The human person is only a person by virtue of this celestial dimension, archetypal, angelic, which is the celestial pole, without which the terrestrial pole, meaning earthly pole, of his human dimension is completely depolarized in vagabondage and perdition. Okay, that's quite interesting. I think what I might connect here. Okay, so we know of the concept of polarization, right? And we see this playing out in the world. I think basically the idea would be that we fall into sort of profane polarization because of the loss, because of the absence of the sense of the divine double. And that when we're restored into that polarity, let's say wrestling with the angel, that we can sort of forget the spiritual and earthly struggle and restore ourselves into that more of a spiritual struggle. A little bit idealistic, but that's the basic idea. Okay, so that's actually quite simple so far. So we're going to continue. Cheetham says, the cosmos of Averroes, lacking this personal connection between the individual soul and its archetype, is based upon an abstract connection between heaven and earth that denies the cosmic role of presence, individuality, and personal revelatory knowledge. The intelligible forms become impersonal and universal. The intelligible forms become impersonal and universal. For a while, the sensible forms retained their personal force because they are closest to us in this cosmology, since it is matter that individuates. But in the end, they faded, lost their animation, their life, and inevitably descended to the level of objects. And the soul descended with them, turning increasingly towards the world of matter as the living connection with heaven faded. That was sort of in the cosmology of Averroes, which we've inherited a version of through Descartes. And so the idea is that our soul has fallen down and down and down further towards matter, regarded as simply mere objects, which lose their personality as we lose our personality, as we lose our presence, which is denied to have a cosmic role of connecting heaven and earth. The idea being that we can restore animation, aliveness, life, presence, soul, and that connection between heaven and earth through presence, along with individuality, the role of personal revelatory knowledge, and this sort of, in a sense, the non-objective or personal quality of things. Okay. Let's continue with Cheetham, who says, this makes more precise the sense in which the cosmology of Avicenna and Suhrawardi is both an angelology and an anthropology. Okay, what does he mean? Human knowledge, human destiny, and the existence of persons depend upon the presence of the angelic hierarchy and upon the search for a realization of the connection to this realm by means of the active imagination. Okay, so basically, the idea here is that this sort of intermediary realm that we sort of restored into an awareness of this relationship with the divine double through practicing the perspective taking, practicing taking up the perspective of the soul and entering into that relationship. Then what we also get is access to not only the imaginal world and imaginal worlds, but also the skill or like imagination considered actively distinct from but related to the Jungian active imagination. And we also have the idea that our knowledge in the sort of Aristotelian or maybe not Aristotelian way that we were talking about last time, the way that nous is supposed to sort of personify and fulfill both heaven and earthly. dimensions. We also get a restoration of, quote, human destiny and the existence of persons. Okay. What else does Cheetham want to say? And the and the central spiritual fact of this great structure is its focus upon the individuality of each soul. It is this celestial pole that is the source of that orientation without which humanity is irremediably lost in the world of absence. Okay, so we have the return to this, again, spiritual polarity between, you could say, passive and active dimensions of the soul, or, yeah, the earthly or lower soul and this divine double, and that this is connected to a kind of reorientation, and a solution to nihilism as the world of absence. That is also a restoration of individuality. Corbin says, if the prophet received his revelations from the angel Gabriel, it is none the less true that for each mystical sage, joining himself with the active intelligence, which is but the speculative name of the angel Holy Spirit, is each time equivalent to becoming the seal of prophecy. Okay, so it's a similar process that sort of appears in different sort of instances or incarnations. Quote, this experience is the foundation of prophetic philosophy. This claim appears heretical in the extreme to the literalists and dogmatists in all the Abrahamic religions, because this relationship takes precedence over any public doctrines or sectarian affiliations. Right, so we have here the idea that two ideas. One of them is that this relationship with the divine double is a source of prophecy and prophetic philosophy, and also that it appears heretical because it's sort of contra literalism, dogmatism, inherently involving imagination and symbol. And also it involves personal relationship, personal revelation. And it's hard to fit that in with public doctrine or sectarian affiliation. Quote, the personal yet objective nature of the experience is expressed by Corbin in reference to the Gnostic Acts of Peter, which is super interesting because I did a whole video on the Gnostic Acts of Peter. In the series on Jung, Jung's Christianity. Corbin's quote goes, here then, the Apostle Peter evokes the event of the transfiguration. Of this event, which was visible only to some, and even then not to their bodily eyes, he can say but one thing, which is translated, I saw him as I was able to receive him. I saw him as I was able to receive him. Each time the soul has attained or is on its way to attaining its state of perfect individuation. Okay, I actually don't think that quality is especially important. So what I've gotten to is just that this quality of sort of prophetic philosophy that can result from the integrity within this relationship with the divine double has a both deeply personal but also objective. There are objective aspects. What would that mean? I think shareable, meaning consensually, meaning consensually validatable, meaning in a way verifiable by others, not entirely private. And this might that kind of experience might have to do with the quality of receiving, the capacity to receive, and of sight or perception. Anyway, so we'll continue. We're just talking about qualities in the relationship between, things which result, affordances, unlockables, qualities that come from the relationship with the divine double. Cheetham continues. Well, it was also connected with cosmology. But this cosmology also implies that we are engaged in a cosmic drama. We are not observers, but must be active participants on pain of losing our true life. Neither the salvational attainment of individuation and the birth of the soul in heaven, nor the concomitant vision of the guide or Lord to whom the guide may lead, are to be regarded as given. They must be one. They must be one. We are engaged in a battle for the angel, for our Lord, for ourselves. And it is all the same battle. Okay. We now get another quote from Corbin. He says, on the one hand, it may befall a soul to die as a soul can die by falling below itself, below its condition of a human soul, by actualizing in itself its bestial and demonic virtuality. This is its hell, the hell that it carries in itself. Just as its bliss is elevation above itself, flowering of its angelic virtuality. Personal survival cannot then be thought of as purely and simply prolonging the status of the human condition, the acquired dispositions. The latter doubtless concern what we call the personality, but the essential person in its posthumous becoming and in its immortality perhaps immeasurably transcends the personality of so-and-so and of so-and-so. Okay, this is obviously difficult, and I have to say I really don't like the idea of sort of falling away or death of the soul connected with the demonic and with hell feels very suspiciously close to the two worlds mythology that I understand that we want to leave behind. So there are certain risks that I see in this kind of cosmology, and I have to say I have not found Corbin's writing to be that helpful so far, but obviously I'm missing the point. So I think what I would connect here is that the more that the soul falls, the more that it forgets or becomes unaware. There's a concealing that goes along with falling. Now, I would connect the process of development of the soul or whatever to be a process of increasing awareness, which I'm happy to also include with a sort of development of individuality, or personhood and sort of existential intensity. But yeah, I just think the risk of repression is real. But we'll move on here. I'm really uncomfortable about buying into the cosmology that Cheetham seems to think is necessary, because we left those cosmologies behind for reasons. Anyway, let's continue with Cheetham, who says, we can aspire to the meeting with the essential person, or we can fail to do so. If we fail to make ourselves fit companions for the angel, we are barred from immortality of the essential person. We are barred from the immortality of the essential person. What would that mean, though? I just okay, so we sort of have to, it's something that we sort of opt into or choose. It has to be sought after, this kind of relationship. And there's a quality of sort of aspirational development that here is connected with the immortality of the essential person, which I'm not convinced is a desirable feature. Anyway, Cheetham continues, the powers of darkness are real, the wholeness that Corbin seeks through the encounter with the angel is based upon the light of the essential person. The wholeness that Corbin seeks through the encounter with the angel is based upon the light of the essential person. Corbin says, the totality represented by their bi-unity is therefore light upon light. It can never be a composite of Mazdian light and Ahrimanian darkness, or in psychological terms, of consciousness and its shadow. This would imply a significant departure from Jung, and I can see both sides of that. I mean, the risk here is that this sort of really returns right back to the vilification and demonization of the shadow, and this sort of battle between light and darkness, and I understand that there are good reasons why we sort of left that behind. Um, but there are also risks the other way as well. So I'll have to leave that there. I don't like, to me, I mean, I would sort of, I don't see how you can get wholeness without a composite that includes darkness, because again, darkness is sort of by definition contrasted with light. The claim here is that that is different and that it's not like that. Yes, as Cheetham says, thus Corbin differentiates this doctrine from Jung's conception of wholeness. There is to be no integration of the shadow, but victory over the forces of darkness. I would reject that out of hand. I think that's extremely foolish. It can also be foolish the other way. The question does come down to, what is the relationship with darkness? What is the relationship with the shadow? What is the relationship with evil? And I think that this cosmology of Manichaean dualism, this battle between light and darkness, I don't think that necessarily helps. But there are also great risks to Jung's approach. And I need to know more about Corbin to be able to evaluate this more properly. But on the face of it, lack of integration of the shadow is the whole problem of human culture. For, that's exactly what we're missing. Anyway, Cheetham continues. Suhrawardi stresses the positive reality of Ahrimanian negativity. Suhrawardi stresses the positive reality of Ahrimanian negativity in its struggle with the forces of light. His doctrine is marked by a kind of Manichaean dualism. The darkness of evil is not a mere absence of light, it is its contrary, and would exist even in the absence of light. We ally ourselves with one side or the other. While we cannot destroy the angel, we can turn away from it, from our responsibility to ourselves and to what is best in us. Okay, we're then going to get another quote from Corbin, but the thing here is that obviously both one and two, monisms and dualisms are extremely deep archetypal structures, and it's not fair to say that simply by virtue of being a dualism, we have to sort of reject it out of hand. I would say that we have to practically sort of develop the capacity to sort of inhabit and take up both sides of the duality, and then attain a perspective that is encompassing and participating within both, any duality that is. And so the question here would be, so if Suhrawardi was talking about the positive reality of Ahrimanian negativity, which I would think is, I guess he's saying that it's like giving it a substance, which is kind of dualistic. Anyway, whether you frame it as a contrast between sort of monism and dualism, or whether you frame it as a contrast between how we regard the place and role of darkness or the shadow. I'm not sure it matters too much. The quote from Corbin goes, "It is not in the power of a human being to destroy his celestial idea, but it is in his power to betray it, to separate himself from it, to have at the entrance to the Shinvat or Shinvat bridge, nothing face to face with him but the abominable and demonic caricature of his eye, delivered over to him without a heavenly sponsor." Okay, so it's just talking about the quality of relationship with the divine double, that one cannot sort of destroy that relationship, but or that angel, but one can sort of betray it and not show up for that relationship. Okay, that's pretty straightforward. Cheetham says, but the cosmic struggle is not one-sided. In a theme that stretches from Mazdaean Iran to contemporary Shi'ism, quote, the God of light has need of the aid of all his favartis, because the menace of active nihilism is terrifying. As in pre-eternity, the favartis chose to give up their purely celestial existence and incarnate as angel souls. So we must choose to help combat the horrors of Ahriman. There is a mystical solidarity between the paired beings who comprise the cosmic hierarchy. Between God and his fravatis, or the divine doubles, in the ranks of the archangels, with their bonds of love and devotion, and between the human soul and its angel. This bond is what the Shiites call spiritual chivalry, of which a footnote. This chivalry is a crucial concept for Corbin and in Islamic mysticism. It was Corbin's hope that this may be ultimately what can unite the followers of the three Abrahamic religions in a single diversely determined purpose. Okay. So the quality of spiritual chivalry as an expression of the sort of bond between God and these angels and the human soul and its angel. Quote, if this reciprocal bond is broken, then they face each other as master and slave. That's um, Hegel. One of the two must disappear. Okay, that's all quite straightforward for me. Again, it's sort of part of it depends on whether you how much you want to buy into. Yeah, it does go back to that Jung's chapter 5 in Ion on Christ as a symbol of the self. It's like we have to take evil seriously, I would say, and we have to avoid repressing the shadow, while at the same time working out how to include such forces within the whole. So without reifying a dualism of good and evil. Those are my sort of instincts about it. The idea being that if you sort of, yeah, I mean, this is Taoism as well. If you confront evil directly, then it wins. Anyway, I'll continue because we're almost through this section. The personal God, as the supreme determination of the absolute, can only appear as and to a person, can only appear as a person to a person. If the possibility of encountering the angel, the Lord, is eliminated, the human individual has no longer any celestial pole, no orientation, and thus no direction for its moral compass, nothing to guarantee its unique being. There will no longer be persons, only units in a totalitarian or totalizing regime of one form or another. Okay, this is sort of an elaboration of the stuff about emanation from a divine source in terms of a personal God that we can relate with through the relationship with the divine double, I guess. That angel considered as a representative of God. Very classical, anyway. Uh, yeah, and so in the absence of that, where there's no longer persons, only units in a totalitarian or totalizing regime of one form or another. We can see all the traps here in the other direction about narcissism, spiritual bypassing, the cult of individuality, etc., etc. Anyway, whether that regime is political, economic, or scientific, the result is the same. We are powerless, lost in anonymity. Anonymity is a great blessing in a way, but I get his point. We are powerless, lost in anonymity, rolled along like the foam in the torrent, and completely at the mercy of the social, biological, and political environments. This is the abyss, the final loss of the soul in bitterness and helplessness, knowing ourselves to be the only objects in a world where, in Charles Darwin's famous phrase, there is no higher or lower. Um, there are a couple of traps in there. One of them is, in order to, in a sense, verify the trend toward the personal God and personification that is, and sort of individuality that is being recommended here, if that would need to have bearing on the social, biological, and political environment. Um, Meaning not just be expressed as a sort of deepened source of meaning, but actually be able to maneuver us out of the abyss. And we also see that if we understand Darwin as a sort of relativist in a way, there is no higher or lower because they're all just different evolved forms. Well, then the implication of that is social Darwinism, which we've tried a lot, and Did it work? I mean, no. I mean, it sort of ends in genocide, so or justifies that. And that's kind of what the Nazis were on about, that there is a higher and a lower. So I don't know. I think you want to be really careful with the higher and lower stuff. I mean, look, it's tricky because there is something important about hierarchy, and there is something probably inevitable about hierarchy. And so repressing that isn't helpful because it just becomes covert. Um, but look, there's so many traps everywhere here. You have to avoid projecting that hierarchy onto, because everyone has it's like we are this is Jamie Wheel's what's it called? Oh, I've forgotten the name for that. Hang on. Oh, it's rapture ideology, as in there's a big change coming soon. We are the chosen people. We're going to get through, so accelerate. And like the Silicon Valley people are saying that, and the Jews are like, we are the chosen people, and um, the Nazis were like, we're going to institute the Aryan thing, and it's like this can be a consequence of really emphasizing the hierarchicality. So it's fine to want to avoid the nihilism trap, but there's a trap in the other direction too. Anyway, let's just finish off the end of the section here. Cheetham says and so here Cheetham is sort of identifying Darwin with the sort of relativism of nihilism. There is no higher and lower. It's revealing to see that Darwin in his later years was intensely aware of the impact of historical reductionism, of the fall into history, which turns nature into a collection of objects. We get a quote from Darwin. Poetry of many kinds gave me great pleasure. Formerly, pictures gave me considerable and music very great delight. But now for many years I cannot endure to read a line of poetry. I have also lost almost any taste for pictures or music. My mind seems to have become a kind of machine for grinding general laws out of a large collection of fact. The loss of these higher tastes is a loss of happiness, and it may possibly be injurious to the intellect, and more probably to the moral character, by enfeebling the emotional part of our nature. The loss of these higher tastes is a loss of happiness, and may possibly be injurious to the intellect, and more probably to the moral character, by enfeebling the emotional part of our nature. So here, Darwin is suggesting away from the machines, away from the abstract, toward the emotional, toward nature, reclaiming happiness and the intellect, as well as morality, which to me comports with Jung. But anyway, we'll continue. From the viewpoint of these traditional cosmologies, it's not the emotional part of us that degenerates, but the imagining part. So the cosmic charge laid upon us is to make ourselves capable of God for ourselves. Sorry, that's a cosmic charge, and for ourselves, it's to achieve our eternal individuality by struggling with and for the angel and for God, not the absolute, the Deus absconditus, beyond all knowing, but God as revealed through the creation, experienced as the revelation of divine being, as a personal theophanic form, appearing simultaneously as and to a person. I'm sort of fine with all that, and then I'm just going to disagree with how to do that, how to achieve that, how to make ourselves capable of that. And I'm also still disagreeing about the cosmology and its importance, or I'm questioning it. And so there's this, yes, this bond between sort of God revealed in the angel, um, and the sort of more earthly aspect of the soul. And he says, This common bond of sympathy gives meaning and direction to the most important struggle in which we can engage. So it's a kind of normative order. One thinks here not only of Jung and his emphasis on individuation, but of the poets as well. Robert Frost, quote, the most important thing is to find your voice. And Diane de Prima, quote, the most important war is the war against the imagination. Or again, HD, quote, what can be seen is at stake. We have relegated the imagination to the realm of the poets, and with it, the struggle for individuation, for one's angel. Okay, so here we simply have the idea that by reclaiming by reclaiming the imagination, by reclaiming one's relationship with the angel, which is conceived here as either a relationship between higher and lower aspects of the soul or soul and divine double. I would say distinct from ego and divine double. That is the process of individuation. And so this is partly how we can see if we understand that there is a deeper interrelationship between the imagination and that relationship, then we understand how the imagination, why the imagination is so important to the process of individuation, and why the practice of imagination in, for, and by itself, imaginal practice, can help us. Why we should practice imaginally, which is a big insight. Imagination is tied to the relationship with the divine double and to, by extension, the process of individuation. Again, we have relegated the imagination to the realm of the poets, and with it, the struggle for individuation, for one's angel. That's also tied to the revelation of the personal God and to prophetic philosophy, by the way. This is not certainly the struggle to be an ego of an angel-less soul, but the struggle to enact the reality that all our knowledge, our action, all our passion is the action of the donor, that our soul receives the illumination that emanates upon it, floods its being. To recognize this action of the active intelligence or Holy Spirit is the Oriental knowledge, the knowledge that is the Orient, the origin of all knowledge. Okay? So there's a certain idea that by virtue of that relationship, knowledge, action, and passion sort of result from that, and we can realize that. And that it can be conceived of as the action of this active intelligence or Holy Spirit as a kind of origin of knowledge. Let's continue. Just briefly, the struggle is to become whole, and this requires uniting with the other half of our being. The highest form of being is the person and the presence that this entails. And our most profound and essential function is theophanic, to manifest God, to be the theophor, the bearer of the divinity. There are, in these philosophies of esoteric Islam, entire ontologies and phenomenologies of individuation and of the active imagination that require an anthropocosmology so grand in its conception, so all-encompassing in its vision, that little in modern thought can rival it. It's no wonder that Corbin, much as he may borrow from the vocabulary of C.G. Jung, in discussing these issues, is always careful to say that there must be no question of psychologizing the meanings of these cosmologies and ontologies. As Jung well knew, the scientific or rationalistic context for the events of the soul is insufficient at best and damaging at worst. In order to heal the wounded, disoriented soul, it will not do to propose remedies that are crippled in their effectiveness by their implicit presumption that the prison in which the soul is trapped is the whole of reality. In order to heal the wounded, disoriented soul, it will not do to propose remedies that are crippled in their effectiveness by their implicit presumption that the prison in which the soul is trapped is the whole of reality. But the escape from this prison is not easy. Reorientation requires a revolution of consciousness so profound that it may well threaten the sanity of an unguided ego. The ego must be wholly and painfully transformed in order for the encounter with the angel to occur. Spiritual birth requires the death of the ego. As Jung would have it, a victory for the self is always a defeat for the ego. Okay, so there's obviously a lot in there. I would simply suggest that wholeness is wholeness. There's no way around that. Totality is totality. That means everything. And so we have to find a way to include that which we don't like about ourselves. If we don't see the importance of that, then we both don't reach wholeness, which amounts to a kind of pride, Luciferian pride, and repression at the same time. At the same time, yeah, we can admit that the scientific perspective is one among many, but if you want to get out of the cave, Plato's cave, you have to enter the cave first. You have to begin from within the cave. It's not a matter of having ecology, it's not a matter of simply having a cosmology which is grand, but one that we can rationally adopt and one that doesn't reify the dualism of the struggle of good and evil. Again, so it may well be that we need cosmology, although earlier Corbin was talking about moving between different cosmologies, not simply adopting one of them. I guess what it comes back to, I mean, his claim is that it, the question is about what works. And I think the reality is that people encounter the shadow. People encounter those aspects of themselves. If we continue to deny and repress that, I don't see how we can begin. So I would say, yes, there's obviously a big point there about the different modes of being, yes, and one cannot have gone through several thousand years of development of consciousness toward matter, the Western consciousness as a kind of prodigal son, only to abandon the scientific perspective. That would be the pre-trans fallacy and a regression in the extreme. We need to integrate that and adopt that and be realistic about that. And returning to a medieval cosmology that reifies dualism, as far as I can tell, feels to me equally risky. And there are persistent risks all the way through here that are not being noticed. And that's not an accident. There is a, I mean, there's a kind of realpolitik assessment of this stuff, which it's got to be brought down into practice, into what works. And the reality of the shadow is part and parcel of that. Again, Viveki's talked about in the modern condition is to swing between fundamentalism, like fundamentalist responses going back to the religions, and then well, we have nihilism on the other hand. And I think we would talk about relativism. So again, like fundamentalism, postmodernism, and then nihilism as well. And the idea is, can we find something different than that? And like, I feel that the solutions that are being proposed here are, let's just go back to a medieval cosmology and adopt a metaphysics of light against darkness and restore the virtue of the imagination. And there's a lot of profound value to that. But there are a number of oversights, and I've tried to point to them throughout. I won't keep doing it here because I'm just ranting, but yeah, rather short shrift to Jung. Anyway, I'll continue with section 2, which is disciples of Kadir. Okay.